Hey moms, it's Laura Ollinger. Welcome to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast. Because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world. Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Positively Healthy Mom. Today I'm introducing you to Dana Skaggs, who is a psychotherapist, a coach, a podcast host. Her podcast is called Phoenix and Flame, sounds very interesting. And she's also a keynote speaker. So Dana, I'm so excited to introduce you to my audience because the topic that you're bringing us today is boundaries. And that is just huge for moms to talk about and learn about. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Laura. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I thought what we would do is why don't we actually just start with, I always like to go like the 101 level, like definition of boundaries. What is boundaries to you?
I like to describe boundaries using visual analogies. I like to describe it in terms of yards. So imagine you have a yard in front of you, and then there's a fence line, then you have a neighbor. So if you think about your yard as your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, your opinions are in your yard, which you have a right to all of those. You also have a responsibility for those things. Now, across and over the fence line is your neighbor's yard. Your neighbor also has her thoughts, feelings, and actions over there, which are your neighbor's responsibility. And so I love there because frequently we get those inverse, like rather than paying attention to our own thoughts and feelings and actions, we give those over and someone telling us what we should think and feel. And then we're over there in our neighbor's yard trying to be super involved with trying to get them to feel a certain way about us, trying to get them to like us, trying to keep the peace, all the things, which involves someone else's feelings. And so that's kind of like a basic way of explaining what boundaries are and how they work in relationships.
I love that. I love that really just simple, easy to understand visual. And so why do people, I know there are a wide variety of reasons, but like, if you could summarize it, like why do people typically cross boundaries?
They typically cross boundaries because they're looking to get a need met. They have a fear. Usually it's a fear of abandonment or a fear of rejection. I hear a lot from people that are wanting to people please. They're wanting to keep the peace. Lots of times it's how they were raised. You kind of cross over into enabling and being codependent because they are scared of being abandoned. So they are wanting to try to get the other person to like them. And so they're going to say whatever they feel like they need to say to get approval from the other person so they feel like they can have that connection with them. And so that's one of the main ways that the boundaries gets kind of crossed over and we kind of get confused about how we're supposed to play that out. Another thing that goes along those lines is other people aren't responsible for reading our mind. And so if we have something that is really bothering us, then it's our responsibility to speak it in a respectful way. But most of us are scared to death to do that because we think if I tell this person my truth, if I tell them how I really think or feel about this topic, I just know they're not going to like it. They're going to get mad at me. They're going to yell at me. They're going to, again, abandon me, reject me. And so I'm not going to say any of those things. And so we get stuck with that inside of us and then get upset that the other person doesn't just magically know what we think or feel about a topic. And so it's really very rampant in all areas, in personal, professional, all kinds of places.
Yeah, that's really interesting because really when that happens, that's an abandonment of your own self. So, right? Like you're fearing abandonment from the other person, but really you're doing it to yourself. So it's just as bad or if not worse, right?
That's right. That's right. Because we have a responsibility to our own yard. We have a responsibility to nurture our own yard, what our thoughts are, what our feelings are. And see, when we know that we have a right to whatever we're thinking and feeling, they're not good or bad, right or wrong. They're just thoughts and feelings, and we have a right to them. If someone else doesn't have to understand what we're thinking or feeling, they don't have to accept it. They don't have to approve because quite frankly, it's not in their yard. See, we're the ones that have to know that. And so when we understand that, we can feel comfortable that we have a right to our own opinions and our neighbor has a right to their opinions. We don't have to think and feel the same to accept that, but we're the ones that have to accept what's in our own yard first.
And what happens, or how do you coach your clients when they have a fear of rejection or abandonment or whatever? Like, how do you help them feel safe in themselves of holding those boundaries?
Well, we look at the relationship, first of all, and seeing kind of what's going on there. What are the dynamics? And then as they move forward, we have to face if you are rejected. What if they do? What if you face your truth, you share your truth, and they don't like it? It's like, okay, well, that doesn't feel very good. Well, no, it doesn't. And well, I don't want them to not like me. Well, they might not. We cannot always assure that everyone is always going to like or approve everything that we think or feel. So are we going to just try to cherry pick everything we say to appease everyone else? Or are we going to like crawl in a hole and not say anything at all? Or are we going to be authentic? If we're going to be authentic, which is honoring of ourselves, and that we are the ones that have the responsibility to do that. Like I've said before, there's one person on the planet that's given the responsibility of keeping us together, and that's us. And if we don't do that, if we abandon ourselves, as you mentioned earlier, and our wheels start getting wobbly and falling off, then we don't have what we need to help care for the people around us. People around us are not the ones responsible for keeping us together. We are. We're the ones that have to be able to do that. So in terms of rejection, we have to face the fact that, yes, sometimes people will criticize. Sometimes people will not like things that we say or do. That is going to happen. It's not if, it's when. And so then, okay, what if they don't like you? And someone will say, well, I don't want them not to like me. Well, of course you don't. But what if they don't like you?
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be uncomfortable. Yes, it is uncomfortable. And well, I don't want to be uncomfortable. Well, sorry, because being a human, you're going to be uncomfortable sometimes. See, when we learn we can sit with that discomfort, we don't have to run from it. We don't have to try to avoid it. People spend so much effort trying to avoid discomfort, which leads to the feeling, oh, I don't want them to reject me because I'm going to feel abandoned. But truly, are you? And if someone leaves you because they don't agree, if they won't hear your no, that's essentially what it is. You don't agree on something. You're saying no to something they want you to say yes to, in essence. If they won't hear your no and they reject you because of that, it might be uncomfortable, but who in fact have you lost? Because you haven't lost a true friend. Because a true friend would hear your no. They would hear your authentic feelings. They would receive your authentic thoughts and your authentic opinions. And even if they didn't agree with you, that would be okay. They would create space for you. And so if someone rejects you because you don't agree with them, then you have to ask yourself, what exactly have you lost? And maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think that's so powerful. And especially to teach our teenagers who are, entering into romantic relationships. And a lot of times, and I see this mostly with girls, but obviously, boys, have this, same things. But girls are so afraid to have that feeling of rejection or feeling sad that a relationship is over, whatever it might be. And so she does tend to abandon herself. And then I think that question that you posed was powerful, which is, what exactly are you really losing? Like, you're actually losing in an unhealthy relationship, and maybe we should celebrate that. And I know, they would have a hard time kind of accepting that. There would need to be a process with that. But just the idea that it's like, that's the question. What are you really losing in the first place?
Mm-hmm. And you just, like you mentioned earlier, it was a fantastic comment that you made, Laura, is that we cannot abandon ourselves. Because people are so afraid of being abandoned. But I'm like, if you go look in the mirror, that person looking back at you is never going to abandon you. You are always going to be with you. You're never truly going to be alone. That person that's staring back at you, that is who is on your team. We need to get on our own team. So we run around trying to sort of like sell ourselves out to please everybody around us. Then who do we become? We don't even know who we are anymore.
Yeah.
And when we're in the teen years, that's really hard because we're trying to figure out who am I and what's important and how do I need to stay included and what do I need to wear? What do I need to say? What do I need to do so that I'll be included in the group? The teen years are very difficult to try to find our footing, but it's a great place to start figuring that out. And if you cannot be your authentic self with someone, then what does that say about the relationship?
Yeah, that's really great. So how would you, you're a mother of 3 kids yourself. How would you advise or coach a teenager if they really were having their boundaries crossed by someone else and really were having a hard time establishing those boundaries? Because, like you said, it's such a tricky time in the first place. So they're just trying to figure out their own identity. And, they don't want to face that loss or rejection or whatever. So what would you do or say?
Well, I would say 2 things. One, start with baby knows. Start with doing something small. For example, let's say you're with a group and they're like, "Hey, let's all go to this new Japanese place," right? And you hate Japanese food, right? Then you would say, "You know what, guys? Why don't we try this Italian place down the road? I hear it's fantastic. I'm not a big fan of Japanese food, but the Italian place is great. Maybe y'all can go to the Japanese place when I'm not around. I just don't really like that, but here's another alternative." So we start out with smaller no's, okay, and you try that out, okay? It just and also, in addition to starting out with what we call baby no's, it's also trying it out with people that you trust. So you don't go right off the bat to the Mac Daddy, right?
Right, right.
You don't go to that person that you feel like is really good, the mean girl or the one that really holds all the power, the power at school. You don't want to do that. You want to start out with people that you know care about you, that you feel comfortable with already. And you start kind of expressing that with them. And a boundary is essentially you're speaking your truth. And also, if you don't want to do something, then you say, "I'm not really comfortable doing that," but you offer an alternative. Say,
Mm,
what about doing if we did this instead?" And
hmm
so you do 2 things. One, when you're doing the baby nose, you're kind of getting used to doing that. And you also try it with people that you're comfortable with. That way, you get better and better at it, and then when you finally have to set your ground with someone who has more political power at school, so to say,
hmm
you're more comfortable with what you're doing by then.
Yeah, I like that. Just kind of working your way up. In fact, that reminds me of what you were saying earlier, which is, we have a hard time as humans really tolerating discomfort. And so what that made me think of in my head was like, it's really like building a muscle over time, just like being able to sit with those feelings and sit with the fact that someone doesn't like me or sit with the fact that might have made someone angry, right? And so like building that up. And so just kind of like that parallels to what you're saying about kind of building this muscle and kind of working your way up with starting with a safe person, practicing that, holding that boundary, and, it can even be done, like you said, but in such a nice way, just, hey, Japanese food isn't my thing. I'm not a fan, right? It's like there's so many ways you could say it that's just so very neutral, right? And doesn't cause waves like, you're not having to say, hey, Japanese food stinks. Like you're not like me, right? You're just saying it's not my thing, right? So it's keeping it in your own yard. And then, could we try this place instead, right? Like I love how you're giving that framework for it. And then what happens when, is there any way to help someone who, say you came across an adult woman or a teenager, and again, it's not always women, but because we're talking to women, that's kind of who we're talking about right now, who's really in kind of like stage 10 of like, has never had boundaries, and now they're in an abusive relationship. Where do you even start when it's gotten that far for that long?
Yeah. Well, with someone like that, it's helpful for them to seek out a coach or a therapist or someone that they trust, a mentor, where they can just begin to tell their story so they don't feel alone. Because usually, when someone has been in a relationship that long, they've been manipulated and probably gaslit where they don't understand where they stop and someone else begins. They feel like they don't even have a yard. They feel like their yard is someone else's property. They don't have the right to go out and plant their own flowers or trim their own shrubs or anything like that, because someone else is going to tell them those aren't the right kind of flowers. Those flowers are ugly. Jerk those flowers up. I want these to. So and this has happened to them so much with bad consequences, that they've gotten very gun shy, and they've started to believe, wait, I don't have a say so. I don't get to say, I don't have a yard. This yard, it's almost like your neighbor, if your neighbor was the abuser kind of, and the neighbor has shoved down the fence and has appropriated your yard into their yard and is controlling their yard and your yard. And you're standing there, and it's been going on for quite some time, and it's become normalized. You become habituated to it. And so sometimes a woman in that situation, going and talking to someone and just starting to just explain what's going on. Here's the dynamic. So she gets an objective party to listen. And then that objective party gets to kind of reflect back and go, gosh, it seems like you don't feel like you have a say so in what flowers you can plant in your own yard. And so just the person would very gently kind of reflect back, so that the person who's been abused for so long has an opportunity for the clouds to sort of part, and for them to be able to see that maybe this isn't what I want to be happening. And because when you've been gaslit, you you don't believe that your opinion is valid. It's all about what the other person feels, what they think goes. And so you have to have another person to come alongside to begin to see the situation. And then slowly you're like, oh, wow. And then the question becomes, now that I have an awareness of what's going on, now that I see that I actually have a yard, but my neighbor has appropriated it for himself, that my neighbor has shoved my fence down. Okay, now that I'm aware of that, then you start learning what to do. What do I want to do about that? And so you go out and you start saying, I'm not going to do that. The neighbor says, for example, we're going to go here tonight we're going to go to this party tonight. And you really, really, really don't want to go. Then you can begin to say, I don't really feel like going to that party. There's going to be a huge reaction, because here's the thing. We train people how to treat us.
Right.
We train people what to expect from us. And so when we've been in an abusive relationship for quite a while, we didn't know it, right? We didn't do this on purpose. We didn't know, but we've slowly trained this person that they could tell us everything to do, from what to wear, to what to eat, to where to go, and everything. And so when we start saying, I don't think I want to wear that outfit tonight, I'm going to wear something else, and he doesn't like that, then he's gonna be like, "Well, what do you mean?" So there's going to be pushback. But when you understand that his emotions, his feelings, his behavior is in his yard, and you, number 1, did not cause it, his anger, his response, you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. And that's in his yard. He might be looking at you, and he might be talking about you, but his emotions, his opinions are in his yard on the other side of the fence.
Right.
So that's how you start to begin to sort of find your yard, get your fence up, and start learning how to act with appropriate boundaries. You got to kind of take it slow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can imagine if it took that long to, get into that cycle, that it takes quite a while to get out of it as well. Okay, so we are in the holiday season, and what I was thinking of was we're around a lot of family, around a lot of, friends, a lot of social situations, and of course, like the classic, mother-in-law, imagery comes to mind. And what advice do you have for our listeners about how to hold their boundaries so that they can have the holidays that they want? I think that's it. How would you advise our listeners?
Okay. I have one example that comes to mind. It was some conversations that I was recently involved in, and it was a young family, and they wanted to try to have Christmas morning just themselves at their house with their children. But the mother-in-law situation, she had other plans. She'd had years of traditions where other people in the family would all come over, and she was allowed to kind of call the shots. And so they're like, "Oh my gosh, well, we want to have Christmas morning just at our house, but we feel like we have to do what she said, what she tells us to do." I'm like, "No, you don't." "Well, she's going to get mad." "Probably." And like, well, the question is, why can't you allow that to happen? We are responsible for our own actions. So we respectfully say, I appreciate what you're doing, but this Christmas, we're going to stay at our house in the morning, and then we're happy to come over and visit with you all probably about 11 o'clock is when we'll come over. So, see, we're still being proactive. We're still saying what we will do. And see, that is something that people kind of get confused. When they hear boundaries, they think, no, 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 I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And that's part of it. But you can flip that around, and instead of saying what you're not going to do, say what you are going to do.
I love that.
So you're like, mother-in-law, we are so happy. We're going to see you all about 11 o'clock tomorrow. And then she's like, what do you mean 11 o'clock? Everyone else is going to be over here at 9. And you can say, I understand that. And I hope you all have a great time. We'll be happy to see you at 11. And then you're done with the conversation. You don't keep having the conversation. If she goes on and on about it, she says, I can't believe you all don't want to come over here at 9 o'clock. Everybody's always come over here at 9 o'clock. You can say, I say 2 phrases. 1, I'm sorry you feel that way. I hope you have a nice day.
That's awesome. That's great.
Right? And so you're being nice. You're being respectful. You're not being disrespectful, because we are responsible for our own actions. We don't want to be flying out being hateful, because that's on us. So we're saying, I understand where you're coming from. This is our choice. And because what happens when someone's used to doing that, they're going to push, because they're going to think, if I just push enough, if I turn up the flame high enough, I'm going to get them to do what I want them to do, because they're used to having their way. So they're going to start pushing. And so when that happens, you do not engage with that. You say it once, maybe 2 times, but don't keep repeating yourself. You've already said it. They've already heard you. If they keep pushing, you say maybe one more time, we're so glad we're going to see you all at 11. We're looking forward to that. I hope you have a great day. And conversation.
Yeah.
And don't talk about it anymore.
Right. Yeah. Don't get sucked into the trap of the drama and the back and forth and all that. Well, I think that's fantastic advice. You gave us some great phrases and bullet points of how to use that. So last thing is, I'm always talking to moms of teenagers, typically are my audience, but the ages vary. And so what I always want to hammer home every episode is that how we as moms handle ourselves is the model for what our teenagers are watching. Whether we have sons or daughters, they're watching how we handle ourselves. So what would be like kind of a final takeaway is just far as that concept of modeling, how it's helpful to have boundaries as moms so that our kids can learn? Do you have any thoughts?
Yes. So they're watching us, like you said. So let's say we're in a group with other women, and another woman kind of wants us to join in on something that we don't want to do. And let's say our daughter or son, they know we don't want to do that, and they're watching. How is mom going to handle this? And so we're like, thank you for inviting me. I'm not really interested in doing that this year, but I hope you all have a good time. Right? No. And so that's very kind. That's very respectful, but you're setting the line. So, and the person pushes, well, but we want you there. We want to have you there. Well, you've always come. We want you to come. I know you're going to come. And again, one more time, and that's it. I understand that. I understand I've done it in the past. We're just doing something different this year. So I hope you'll have a great time. I'm not going to do that this year, but I'll see you next time around. And here's what you can do. 2 things. You can either change the topic altogether, start talking about something different. It's like, or you can ask them a question about themselves. People love to talk about themselves. So if someone is pressing you to join in and do something that you don't want to do, and you've already set your boundary and they're pressing, and you say respectfully no one more time, and then you say, oh, by the way, how is your aunt doing? She had surgery last week, didn't she? How did that go? They'll be off to the races. 99% of the people will not realize what you've done. Kind of just, you've like deflected that away from this area where they're trying to push you in to do something. You've said no, you said it a second time, you've reinforced your no respectfully, and then you can ask them a question about themselves or just change the topic altogether and ask them what they think about it. Because like I said, people love to talk about themselves. They love to share their opinions on things. They'll go off to the races and they won't realize what you've done. So then you've modeled for your children how they could go to school and sort of set a boundary and not do something that maybe everyone else is doing, but they're not comfortable. And they can kindly and respectfully say, I thank you for inviting me. I don't really want to do that this time. Maybe next time, but I'm not going to do that this time. So you all have a good time. And then they can ask a question. Weren't you in the cheerleading tryouts last week? How did that go?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's a whole just pattern interrupt, like totally losing focus there. Okay, if you don't mind, I actually do have, this will be my last question, I swear. What I also thought of was, what about boundaries in the immediate family? So sometimes moms end up doing too much for their kids and they don't get their kids to take on the correct responsibilities. And then the kid starts begging, Mom, you always do my laundry, or Mom, you always wake me up, whatever it is. How can a mom set boundaries with her own kids?
That's a fantastic question, Laura, because what happens sometimes is moms don't allow natural consequences to happen. Because we have to allow our children to reach the pain threshold. The pain threshold for your listeners is before any of us are willing to do the work of change, the pain of staying the same has to be greater than the pain of change. It's a threshold, and none of us are going to change anything until we reach it. But in order to reach that, we have to reach that level of pain. So for example, let's say you have a child that you've done his laundry for the longest, but let's say he's like 16, 17 years old now. And you're thinking, you want to kind of help prepare him so that when he launches off, goes to college or moves out or whatever, that he's prepared. He knows how to do his laundry. And you're like, okay, I've done your laundry and happy to do it, but now I want you to start doing your own laundry. And first of all, you need to be specific. What does that mean? Do your own laundry, because he's never done it before. You have to have respect that you've done it. You've trained this situation where he's incompetent in this area. And so we can own that we don't need to feel bad about that. We have grace for ourselves. We just own it, right? No judging, just own it. And so then we're like, okay, we're going to give you your own laundry basket. And your day is going to be Wednesday. You need to get all of your laundry in the wash and through the dryer, have all of your clothes out of the washer and out of the dryer by 8:00 on, say, Wednesday night. Be very
Yeah.
specific. So you say, and by the way, if you don't have your clothes out of the washer and the dryer by 8:00 on Wednesday night, then whatever's still in there, I'm going to take it all and I'm going to put it in a bag and it's going to go in the spare room and you're not going to get it for a week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, that would just be each person could just decide on their own. But let me tell you, whatever consequence that you come up with, you're going to have to apply because they're not going to believe you. So spend some time on what you think an appropriate consequence would be, and maybe talk to your partner about that. So you're in agreement, all right? And then know that whatever consequence that you set, you're going to have to apply that. And once you do that, you're training your child, okay, this is what's going to happen. So you set them up to succeed. You try to help them as much as you can. Then you're like, okay, now this is you doing it. Here's the detergent. Here's the directions. Do you have any other questions? Do you need any other help at all? And he has an opportunity to ask, to feel like you've helped him. And then, okay, there you go.
Yes.
But you have to be able to let the natural consequences fall.
Right. Otherwise, you're not holding that boundary. Exactly. Which then it's like the whole thing was a big old waste. So that's the whole point. So that is awesome. I love exactly what you said. It's textbook, really. Okay, Dana, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you going forward?
Basically, they can go to Dana Skaggs, DanaSkaggs.com. And if they want to take a free boundaries quiz to find out if they have boundary issues, maybe they do, maybe they don't, they're just kind of wondering, there's this totally free quiz that you can take that'll give you a score. It'll give you all kinds of wonderful feedback and practical tips to help in those areas of boundaries. And then if they want to take, I've got a couple of self courses that they can take, and there's other courses in line, there's coaching. So however it is that they decide they might need some help, I can come alongside and help them.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like you have some amazing resources available. So Dana, again, thank you. You're the queen of boundaries. We so appreciate your time, and take care.
Thank you, Laura, so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast, because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.